reflection of the total knowledge that the sunlight of the moon, that there's this waxing, higher levels, and then this waning, and then this waxing and this waning, this fluctuation. That fluctuation, if we just take one as an example, means that we get larger, more definite, and more completely coherent, and then there's some relaxing or waning of that brain dynamics. And in the middle, there's this point of maximum amplitude or maximum integration of brain cells. We would consider this related to a gap mechanism. And if you count these cells, these cycles up, these fluctuations happen between 8 and 12 times a second. So for example, they could be anywhere between 1/10 of a second and 150 milliseconds. There could be 12 or 16 of them. There are different levels of microstates that are found here in the brain. So at 8 times a second, we'd have 16 of these in a one period of time, and fluctuating 8 and 8. So this is nothing more in this presentation than an understanding of how we go from ka, a piece of consciousness or an impulse of consciousness, to that totality and the level of the gap, and then back to So this waxing and this waning and the level of the EEG dynamics and the level of brain dynamics. And if we wanted to take it even further, we can suggest that one could analyze it, and this has been done. One can go into the medical neuroscience literature and find that there are 3 modes of functioning to create the waxing to maximum, and there are 3 modes of functioning that create the waning back to minimum. And these, again, correspond very beautifully to Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Sankhya, Yoga, Karmamimamsa, and Vedanta. And so it's a beautiful description in modern science of how these cyclic back and forth activities seen in this wave or spindle functioning of alpha activity give rise to our alertness, their ability to reflect the alertness in our own awareness. So there's like this 8-fold collapse and then this 8-fold expansion from ka to to ka. This is very reminiscent of what His Majesty Maharaja Nararamji has shown in the Discovery of Veda and Vedic literature. Everybody is very familiar with this classic diagram, which very clearly and for the first time showed the 4 stages of collapse of impulses and the dynamics of the gap, and Ayanthabhav and Anyonyabhav, the gap dynamics. And we can see the same thing in self-referral functioning of experience, that the outside world collapses to this white dot, you could say, just as an example, this impulse in the gap, and then expanding back. This is that fluctuation of ma to and to ma, that movement from point to infinity and infinity back to a point. This is that whole dynamics of the 4-fold staging of the gap. If we look at EEG, the same 8-fold collapse into the gap and 8-fold expansion out of the gap, we can now visualize in the brainwave coherence as alpha activity. If we look on an object referral level, or the brain or EEG, in comparison to the self-referral or subjective experience level, we also see there's this level of waxing and waning, but in this case it's complementary. Whereas in our description we usually show a coning down to the gap, in the brain it's actually a coning up to create maximum brain dynamics of a coherent nature to support that coning down to the gap and infinity. And so we can talk about the 8, and we do. We have the narration of 8. But here we can actually see the 8. We can directly see the 8 in the brain functioning. And if we can see the 8, we can become the 8. And if we can become the 8, then we live that status of life of being the 8. And so if we take this fluctuation in time of this alpha activity, this alpha wave, and we actually bend it. Imagine this wave if we bend it into a circular form, so that this waxing and waning is a continuous cycle where the beginning of it actually connects to the tail of it. That would be where we can take then this illustration of the constitution of the universe, from to Ma, where the expansion and collapse are shown. And we can actually wrap that same cycle as we go along between to Ma. And that cycle would allow us to appreciate that as in the human brain physiology, this cycle and fluctuation of activity, that we're actually flowing through this back and forth motion of the infinity of conscious structure in the constitution of the universe. And in the collapse of the diversity and the expansion, we have here the synthesis and analysis the fulfillment of conscious-based education, the back and forth movement in brain activity to allow us to access all possibilities. That back and forth motion allows us to access all possibilities in human awareness, allows us to access memory of Veda and Vishwa. So, in a short summary then, our attention can move outwards and our attention can move inwards. We would like to experience and engage that unified field, the constitution of the universe, to have success in life. We would like to have all the innumerable fluctuating impulses of consciousness to coalesce into one ocean, one single ocean of consciousness. And this would be that huge cyclic circle of life. Because brain coherence is that which unifies diversity. And this is the great value of Maharshi's technologies of consciousness. We're 100 billion brain cells, every single one different, each with its own activity, its own, in a sense, sankalp, can share together this vast unity to create infinite possibilities of life. And for now a final representation, I'd like to go to our last EEG, and we can come then, and let me just set this last one up. This is a beautiful description then, I'm going to show you, in our last display of brainwave coherence, of what happens when a person begins the practice of transcendental meditation and then goes on to listen to the Veda, Rik and Sama Veda. So I'll just start this up, and I'll go to the proper screen, and, excuse me one moment. Okay, so we can now go back to the screen, and here is a screen. This is a new screen, but it has some of the same information you had before. On the bottom is the coherence you've seen before, from maximum to minimum. And you can see it's maximum now, and now it's going down and up. The person right now has their eyes closed. In the middle tracing, we have the EEG alpha. And the far left, up top, we have also coherence, but that's the instantaneous coherence. And as it goes up and down, that's registered in the bottom graph. The person has now begun the practice of transcendental meditation, or been instructed to start, actually, and so they're going to adjust themselves. And now they're going to dive in. And you see in the upper right the flower against the background of the cosmic reality of our life. This flower, the lotus, is connected to the EEG brainwave measure, and as the EEG coherence is high, the flower opens up to reveal its full glory. And as coherence goes down, the flower closes up a bit because of the reduced value of the total field of all possibilities. See how it fluctuates in and out? So this is another very beautiful way. You can see here now, Rik Veda has started. Notice how coherent it remains. Now we're... Remarkable high levels of coherence. While the attention is out. Now we're going to shift to Samaveda. Now the person's going to go on to meditation. Notice that in this description, that the coherence never seems to drop. That even if the attention is completely on the level of the self, or the attention is outward on the level of listening,